The neighborhood of Pine Creek Estates hadn't seen a new face in almost 2 years. That's why when the moving truck pulled up to the house across the street, Ray couldn't help but peek through his living room blinds. The new guy was tall with short dark hair, wearing plain clothes, nothing special. But something about him just didn't seem right. Ray had always been the watchful type. Working in computer security for 15 years had trained him to spot things others missed. Small details that didn't add up. Patterns that seemed off. His wife often joked that he couldn't even watch movies without guessing the twist ending halfway through. "You're just being nosy," his wife told him that evening over dinner. "Not everyone wants to join the neighborhood barbecue their first week here." Ray nodded and took another bite of his lasagna, but he wasn't convinced. 3 days had passed, and the new neighbor had barely unpacked. The garage door would open and close at odd hours, sometimes at 3 a.m. Who goes out at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday? Maybe he works night shifts, his teenage daughter suggested with a shrug. Not everyone has a boring 9-to-5 job like you, Dad. But Ray's suspicions only grew stronger when he noticed the cars. The new guy didn't seem to have just one vehicle. Sometimes a blue sedan would be parked in the driveway. Other days, it was a black pickup truck. Once, Ray even spotted a motorcycle that disappeared the next day. 2 weeks after moving day, Ray was taking out the trash when he spotted his neighbor carrying 3 different phones. The man was standing in his driveway, talking intensely on one phone while checking something on another. Who needs 3 phones? Drug dealers, that's who, or at least that's what Ray had seen in those crime shows he binged on weekends. The visiting cars were the next red flag. They would pull up, someone would hop out, spend exactly 7 minutes inside the house, then leave, never staying long, never parking properly, always looking around before entering. Ray started keeping a small notebook by the window, jotting down license plates and times. "You've got way too much free time," his best friend laughed when Ray shared his theories during their weekly poker game. Maybe the guy's just popular, or running a small business from home. But Ray couldn't shake the feeling that something illegal was happening right under everyone's nose. His neighborhood had always been safe, the kind of place where kids rode bikes until streetlights came on and people left their garages open during the day. He wasn't about to let some criminal change that. One evening, Ray was walking his dog when he saw 2 men in suits knock on his neighbor's door. They'd flashed something that looked like badges, but from Ray's position across the street, he couldn't tell if they were police or something else. The meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. The men left, and his neighbor immediately made a phone call while pacing the driveway. That sealed it for Ray. His security mind went into overdrive. He installed a new doorbell camera that had a perfect view of the street. He bought a better pair of binoculars for birdwatching. He even downloaded a police scanner app on his phone. "You're crossing a line here," his wife warned him after finding the binoculars hidden behind the curtains. "What if he's just a private person?" "What if he's not?" Ray countered. "What if he's cooking up drugs or planning something worse? Don't we have a responsibility to keep our neighborhood safe?" The final straw came on a Thursday night. Ray had been working late in his home office when movement across the street caught his eye. His neighbor was loading several heavy-looking duffel bags into the trunk of yet another car Ray hadn't seen before. The man kept looking up and down the street nervously. Ray's heart pounded as he grabbed his phone to record the suspicious activity. This wasn't normal behavior. This was evidence. "I've got you now," Ray whispered to himself as he zoomed in on the license plate. His mind was already racing ahead. How he'd take this information to the police, how they'd thank him for his vigilance, maybe even give him a Citizen's Award for helping crack a major case. Little did Ray know, he was about to step into a situation much bigger and more complicated than he could ever imagine. Over the next few weeks, Ray's kitchen table disappeared under stacks of notes and printouts. His wife could barely find space to set down her coffee mug in the mornings. "This is getting out of hand," she said, moving a pile of papers. "You're turning into one of those crazy people with the wall covered in red string." Ray hardly heard her. He was too busy studying the patterns he'd discovered. The neighbor received visitors mostly on Tuesdays and Fridays. The blue sedan showed up like clockwork every third day. And the blinds in the front window opened precisely at 7:15 each morning. "Normal people don't live like that," Ray muttered, adding another entry to his spreadsheet. He'd created an entire system to track everything, Times, dates, car descriptions, visitor appearances. It was the most detailed project he'd worked on since the security upgrade at his company last year. His daughter rolled her eyes whenever she walked past. "Dad's playing detective again," she'd announced to anyone who would listen. But Ray didn't care. He was convinced he was onto something big. The doorbell camera had been his best investment. Ray had positioned it perfectly to capture the neighbor's driveway without being too obvious. Every night after dinner, he'd download the footage and watch with the intensity of a sports fan during championship games. One evening, the camera caught something that made Ray nearly spill his drink. A package exchange. The neighbor handed a small box to a visitor, who then gave him what looked like an envelope in return. They shook hands and quickly parted ways. "I knew it," Ray whispered to himself, rewinding the footage 3 times. "That's definitely drugs. Or money. Or both." He couldn't sleep that night. His mind raced with questions. Should he call the police now? What if they didn't take him seriously? What if he needed more evidence? The next morning, Ray called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. He needed to focus on gathering more proof. He set up a second camera, this one hidden in a bird feeder he installed at the edge of his front yard. Then he dug out his old telephoto lens from the closet and attached it to his camera. His wife found him crouched by the window 3 hours later. "This isn't healthy," she said, concern evident in her voice. "You need to stop this before you get yourself in trouble." "I'm trying to prevent trouble," Ray insisted. "Someone needs to do something before this guy brings crime into our neighborhood." That weekend, Ray's obsession reached new heights when he spotted his neighbor loading something into his car at 1 a.m. Without thinking, he grabbed his phone and car keys. "Where are you going?" his wife called out from the bedroom. "Just getting some air," Ray lied, already halfway out the door. He kept a safe distance as he followed the neighbor's car through empty streets. The drive lasted 20 minutes before the car pulled into the parking lot of an old warehouse district. Ray killed his headlights and parked behind a delivery truck. His heart hammered against his ribs as he watched his neighbor meet with 2 other men. They talked for a few minutes, then disappeared inside one of the buildings. Ray's hands trembled as he took photos with his phone. The zoom made the images grainy, but they were clear enough to see faces. Clear enough to prove he wasn't making this up. When his neighbor finally emerged 30 minutes later, Ray ducked down in his seat. He waited until the car was gone before starting his own engine. "I've got you now," he whispered, scrolling through the photos. "This is definitely something illegal." The next morning, Ray created a special folder on his computer labeled EVIDENCE and transferred all his photos, videos, and notes. He printed the clearest images and organized them chronologically. As he stared at the timeline he created, a sense of accomplishment washed over him. No one else had noticed what was happening right under their noses. No one else had taken action. Ray picked up his phone and took a deep breath. "It's time to call the police," he decided, already picturing how they would thank him for his thorough investigation. He had no idea that his amateur detective work was about to turn his life upside down in ways he could never have imagined. Rain pounded against the windshield as Ray sat in his car outside Pepper's Diner. Through the foggy glass, he could see his neighbor sitting in a booth near the back, waiting for someone. Ray had been planning to go to the police today, but when he spotted his neighbor leaving in a hurry, he decided to follow him one more time. "Just one more piece of evidence," he muttered to himself, wiping condensation from the inside of his window. His stomach growled. He'd skipped lunch to keep watch, and the smell of burgers from the diner wasn't helping. 20 minutes later, another man arrived. Tall, with a black leather jacket and a serious expression, Ray's neighbor greeted him with a quick handshake, and they immediately put their heads together in conversation. Ray's mind raced. Was this the big boss? The supplier? He needed to get closer to hear what they were saying. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed his phone, turned on the voice recorder app, and headed inside. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. Ray kept his head down, pretending to check messages on his phone as he slid into a booth not far from the 2 men. He ordered a coffee he didn't want and strained to hear their conversation, but the diner was too noisy. "Weather's getting worse," the waitress said, setting down his cup. "They're saying it might flood down by the river." Ray nodded absently, his focus entirely on the 2 men. He noticed his neighbor constantly checking his surroundings, clearly nervous about something. Then his neighbor stood up and headed toward the restroom. This was Ray's chance. Without thinking through what he was about to do, he slid out of his booth and approached the stranger in the leather jacket. "Excuse me," Ray said, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "I know what's going on." The man looked up, confused. "I'm sorry?" Ray leaned in closer. "I've been watching. The packages, the late-night meetings, the different cars. I know what you guys are doing." The stranger's expression changed from confusion to something Ray couldn't quite read. Alarm? Fear? Anger? "I don't know what you're talking about," the man said, his voice suddenly cold. "And I don't know who you are." "I live across from your friend," Ray pressed on, riding a wave of adrenaline. "I've seen everything. The police would be very interested in my evidence." The man stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, without another word, he threw some cash on the table, stood up, and walked quickly toward the exit. Ray felt a rush of satisfaction. He'd spooked them. He watched through the window as the man in the leather jacket pulled out his phone and made a call while hurrying to his car. When his neighbor returned from the restroom and found his companion gone, the look of panic on his face only confirmed Ray's suspicions. "Your friend had to leave," Ray said, unable to resist approaching the neighbor directly. "Something came up, I guess." The neighbor studied Ray's face carefully. "Do I know you?" "We're neighbors," Ray replied with a small smile. "I live across the street. House with the blue shutters." Something flashed in the neighbor's eyes, recognition, then something that looked like concern. "Right," the neighbor said slowly. "The blue shutters." An awkward silence hung between them. Ray's neighbor checked his watch, then gathered his things. "I should get going." "Me too," Ray said, feeling bold. Nasty weather to be out running errands. His neighbor gave him one last look before hurrying out into the rain. Ray watched through the window as the man sat in his car for several minutes, making phone calls with an intense expression. Ray sipped his coffee, feeling like a hero in a movie. He'd just confronted a criminal operation face to face and lived to tell about it. Wait until he told his wife. She'd have to believe him now. On the drive home, Ray rehearsed what he would say to the police. He had photos, videos, notes, and now this face-to-face encounter to report. They would have to take him seriously. He had no idea that at that very moment, urgent phone calls were being made about him, calls that would bring unexpected visitors to his door first thing tomorrow morning. Ray woke to the sound of knocking, firm, official knocks that seemed to shake his front door. Checking the clock, he saw it was barely 7:30 a.m. His wife groaned and pulled the pillow over her head. "What did you do now?" she mumbled. Ray stumbled downstairs in his pajamas and robe, pushing his hair back with one hand. Through the peephole, he saw two people standing on his porch, a woman with short dark hair wearing a gray pantsuit and a tall man in a black suit. Both looked serious, very serious. Heart racing, Ray opened the door. Maybe his neighbor had called the police on him for harassment. Or maybe they were detectives who'd heard about his investigation. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The woman held up a badge and ID card. "I'm Agent Chen with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and this is Agent Wilson. We need to speak with you immediately regarding a matter of national security." Ray's mouth went dry. The FBI. At his house? He glanced across the street at his neighbor's home, then back at the agent's. "Is this about my neighbor?" he blurted out before thinking. The agents exchanged quick glances. "May we come in, sir?" Agent Wilson asked firmly. It didn't sound like a request. Ray led them to his living room, suddenly very aware of the mess. The stacks of surveillance notes on the coffee table, the binoculars by the window, the printouts of license plates. "What's all this?" Agent Chen asked, picking up one of Ray's notebooks. "Research," Ray said weakly. "I've been tracking suspicious activity across the street." Agent Wilson's expression hardened. "Sir, we need you to tell us exactly what you've been doing regarding your neighbor." Ray's chest swelled with pride. They were interested in his work. Maybe they were here to gather his evidence for a big case. "I've been documenting everything," he said eagerly, grabbing his folder labeled EVIDNC. Different cars, mysterious packages, late-night meetings. I followed him to a warehouse district last week, and yesterday I confronted a man he was meeting at Pepper's Diner. The agent's faces grew increasingly grim as Ray spoke. When he mentioned the diner, Agent Chen closed her eyes briefly as if in pain. "Sir," she said slowly, "the man you've been spying on is Special Agent Tom Cooper. He's been working undercover for the past 6 months investigating a money laundering operation with international connections." Ray felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "Your neighbor is FBI," Agent Wilson said bluntly. "And the man you confronted at the diner yesterday was a confidential informant who has now gone dark, presumably because you spooked him by suggesting he was under surveillance." Ray sank into his chair. "But the cars, the packages." "Part of his cover," Agent Chen explained. "Different vehicles to avoid patterns that might tip off suspects. The packages contained surveillance equipment and evidence. The late-night meetings were with other agents and informants." "Oh no," Ray whispered, the horror of what he'd done washing over him. "Your amateur detective work has potentially compromised a 6-month federal investigation," Agent Wilson continued. "An operation targeting criminals who have moved more than $15 million through shell companies in the last year alone." Ray's wife appeared in the doorway, tying her bathrobe. "What's going on?" Agent Chen turned toward her. "Ma'am, your husband has been interfering with a federal investigation." "I didn't know," Ray said, his voice small. "I thought I was helping. I thought he was a criminal." "Instead," Agent Wilson said, "you've been stalking a federal agent and have now compromised his cover and our operation." Ray looked up. "Am I going to jail?" "That depends," Agent Chen said, sitting down across from him. "We need to know exactly what you've done, who you've talked to about this, and what evidence you've collected. And we need your complete cooperation going forward." Ray nodded numbly. "For starters," Agent Wilson said, "we'll need all your notes, recordings, photos, everything." As Ray's wife stared at him in disbelief, he realized his detective fantasy had just turned into a real-life nightmare. The kitchen felt too small with 4 people crammed around the table. Agent Chen flipped through Ray's notebooks, while Agent Wilson scrolled through the photos on Ray's phone. Ray's wife sat beside him, occasionally shooting him looks that ranged from disbelief to anger. 6 months of work, Agent Wilson muttered, shaking his head. 6 months. Ray stared at his hands. His stomach churned with a mix of embarrassment and fear. "I really thought I was doing the right thing." "The right thing would have been calling the police at the beginning instead of playing spy," his wife said, her voice tight with frustration. "Now look at the mess you've made." Agent Chen closed the notebook. "Our informant won't answer our calls. He thinks he's been compromised." "What happens now?" Ray asked quietly. "Now we have to accelerate our timeline," Agent Wilson explained. "Move before the suspects realize something's wrong, which means we lose the chance to identify everyone involved in the operation." The weight of what he'd done pressed down on Ray. People planning crimes would escape because of him, because he couldn't mind his own business. "Am I going to jail?" he asked again, the question that had been burning in his mind since the agents arrived. Agent Chen looked at him with tired eyes. Interfering with a federal investigation is a serious offense. So is stalking a federal agent, not to mention trespassing when you followed Agent Cooper to the warehouse district. Ray felt sick. His wife reached for his hand under the table, squeezing it despite her anger. "But," Agent Chen continued, "charging you would create more complications and publicity that could further compromise our operation." A knock at the front door made everyone jump. Agent Wilson opened it to reveal Ray's neighbor, Agent Cooper, looking nothing like the suspicious character Ray had been watching for weeks. In a crisp white shirt and tie, with a badge clipped to his belt, he looked every bit the federal agent he was. "Sir," he nodded to Agent Wilson before turning his cold gaze to Ray. "So this is our amateur detective." Ray had never felt smaller in his life. "I'm sorry," he managed to say. "I had no idea." "That was the point," Agent Cooper cut him off. "No one was supposed to have any idea. That's how undercover operations work." Agent Chen motioned Agent Cooper to join them at the table. "We're discussing options." "What options?" Agent Cooper scoffed. "My cover is blown. 6 months of building trust with these people gone." "Not necessarily," Agent Wilson said slowly. We might be able to salvage something. All three agents exchanged meaningful looks before turning to Ray. What? Ray asked, feeling a flicker of hope. How can I help? The man you confronted at the diner, our informant, needs to be convinced that you're not a threat, Agent Chen explained. That you're just a nosy neighbor with an overactive imagination. We need you to play a role, Agent Cooper added, to help us fix what you broke. Ray sat up straighter. I'll do anything, whatever you need. His wife squeezed his hand harder, a warning. What exactly would he have to do? Make a phone call, Agent Wilson said. Meet with our informant. Convince him you're harmless. And if I do this? Ray asked. What happens to me legally? The agents exchanged glances again. Cooperation would be taken into consideration, Agent Chen said carefully. But there would be conditions. She pulled out a document from her briefcase and slid it across the table. Ray looked down at the official FBI letterhead. This is a non-disclosure agreement, she explained. If you agree to help us, and if that help actually fixes the problem you created, we might be able to avoid formal charges. But you can never speak about any of this. To anyone. Ever. Not even to brag about how you caught an FBI agent, Agent Cooper added with a hint of sarcasm. Ray looked at his wife, who nodded slightly. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, reaching for the pen Agent Chen offered. I want to make this right. As he signed his name, Ray realized his little neighborhood detective game had turned into something far bigger and more serious than he'd ever imagined. And now, instead of exposing a criminal, he was working for the FBI to catch real ones. His wife leaned close to his ear and whispered, next time, just join a book club or something. The next 2 weeks of Ray's life were nothing like he could have ever imagined. His dining room had been transformed into a makeshift FBI command center with laptops, files, and agents coming and going at all hours. His wife had taken their daughter to stay with her sister, saying they needed space from the chaos. Put this in your ear, Agent Cooper instructed, handing Ray a tiny earpiece. We'll be able to hear everything and guide you through the conversation. Ray's hands shook as he positioned the device. Today was the day he would meet with the informant he'd scared off at the diner. His job was simple, convince the man he was just a nosy neighbor who had made a mistake. Remember your cover story, Agent Chen reminded him. You thought he was dating your ex-wife. That's why you were watching him and approached him at the diner. Ray nodded, rehearsing the story in his head for the 100th time. I'm just a jealous ex-husband who got the wrong guy. And you're not working with any law enforcement, Agent Wilson added firmly. I'm not working with any law enforcement, Ray repeated, though technically that was now a lie. The meeting was set for a coffee shop downtown. Ray arrived 20 minutes early as instructed and took a table near the back with a clear view of the door. His heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Relax, Agent Cooper's voice came through his earpiece. You look nervous. Take a deep breath. Ray sipped his coffee, trying to appear casual. He'd never been good at lying. His wife always said his eye would twitch when he tried to hide something from her. Now he had to lie convincingly with FBI agents listening to every word. The bell above the door jingled, and the informant walked in. He looked different in daylight, younger, less intimidating. He scanned the room, spotted Ray, and frowned. He's here, Ray whispered. Don't whisper to us, Agent Chen's voice came through the earpiece. Act natural. Wave him over. Ray raised his hand in an awkward greeting. The man hesitated, then slowly approached. Thanks for meeting me, Ray said as the man sat down. I wanted to apologize for the other day. The informant said nothing, just stared at him suspiciously. I made a mistake, Ray continued, following the script he practiced. I thought you were someone else. Who did you think I was? The man asked. I thought you were seeing my ex-wife, Ray replied, forcing an embarrassed laugh. She mentioned meeting someone new, and when I saw you with that guy who lives across from me, I jumped to conclusions. Your ex-wife? The informant looked skeptical. Yeah, we split up 6 months ago. She got the house in the city, I moved to the suburbs. It's been rough. Ray was surprised at how easily the lies came out. Maybe he was better at this than he thought. So why were you watching the guy across the street? I wasn't really, Ray said with a shrug. I saw him around the neighborhood. Then I saw you with him and thought, well, I thought wrong. I've been a bit paranoid lately. My wife says I need therapy. The informant's posture relaxed slightly. So you're not a cop? Me? Ray laughed, genuinely this time. No way. I work in security. Boring desk job. Perfect. Agent Chen murmured in his ear. Keep going. For the next 30 minutes, Ray chatted with the informant, building on his cover story with details about his fake divorce and made-up life problems. With the FBI feeding him lines through his earpiece, he managed to sound convincing. By the time they parted ways, the informant seemed satisfied that Ray was just a confused, slightly unstable divorcee with too much time on his hands. Good work, Agent Cooper told him as Ray walked back to his car. He bought it. He's already texting our undercover team to reschedule their meeting. Back at Ray's house, the agents were in good spirits for the first time since they'd arrived on his doorstep. You did well today, Agent Chen said, closing her laptop. Better than we expected. Does this mean I'm off the hook? Ray asked hopefully. Agent Wilson shook his head. Not yet. We still need your help with a few more things. What things? Ray asked, suddenly worried again. We need access to your security company's resources, Agent Cooper explained. Your systems could help us track the money flow we've been trying to map for months. Ray blinked in surprise. You want me to use my work equipment for an FBI investigation? Not exactly, Agent Chen said with a small smile. We want to hire you as a temporary technical consultant. Ray stared at them in disbelief. You're offering me a job? After what I did? Sometimes, Agent Cooper said, the best assets are the ones who cause trouble first. 6 months after the morning when the FBI knocked on his door, Ray sat in the back of a courtroom, watching as 12 people were led in wearing handcuffs. He recognized a few faces from photos he'd seen during the investigation. These were the money launderers his neighbor, Agent Cooper, had been tracking all along. Hard to believe it's finally over, whispered Agent Chen, who sat beside him in a formal suit instead of her usual casual clothes. Ray nodded, still amazed that he'd been part of bringing down a criminal network that had moved millions of illegal dollars through fake businesses. His skills had helped the FBI trace digital money trails they hadn't been able to crack before. Your software solution cut our timeline in half, Agent Wilson had told him last week when they made the arrests. We wouldn't have gotten them all without you. After the hearing ended, Ray stepped outside into the bright sunlight. His wife waited by their car, scrolling through her phone. How'd it go? She asked, looking up. Guilty pleas all around, Ray answered with a small smile. They're facing 20 years each. She squeezed his hand. Does this mean we're finally done with all the FBI stuff? Almost, Ray said, just some paperwork to sign tomorrow. The paperwork turned out to be more than Ray expected. Agent Cooper met him at the local FBI office with a thick folder. These are immunity documents, he explained, sliding them across the desk. Since you helped us successfully close the case, we're officially dropping any potential charges against you for interfering with our investigation. Ray felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he signed each page. So that's it, we're done. Agent Cooper shook his head. Not quite. There's one more thing. He pulled out another document with the FBI seal at the top. What's this? Ray asked, suddenly nervous again. An offer, Agent Cooper explained. The Bureau was impressed with your security expertise. We could use someone with your skills on our cybercrimes team. Ray stared at him in disbelief. You're offering me a job? A real job with the FBI? As a civilian consultant, yes, Agent Cooper nodded. Your nosy neighbor tendencies might actually be useful if they're pointed in the right direction. Ray thought about it for a long moment. Working for the FBI had never been part of his life plan. But then again, neither was spying on an undercover agent. I'll think about it, he said finally, taking the offer letter. I need to talk to my wife first. That evening, as Ray and his wife sat on their front porch watching the sunset, he told her about the offer. So they want to hire the guy who almost ruined their case. She laughed, shaking her head. They said I have natural investigative instincts, Ray replied with a grin. Just needed proper training. His wife sipped her tea thoughtfully. So what are you going to do? Before Ray could answer, a moving truck pulled up across the street. Agent Cooper, or whoever would be living there next, was being replaced by actual new neighbors. A couple with a young child stepped out of a car parked behind the truck. "Looks like we have real neighbors now," his wife observed. Ray watched as the family began unloading boxes. The husband looked around furtively before carrying in a large duffel bag, checking over his shoulder as he unlocked the front door. For a brief moment, Ray felt that old familiar tingle of suspicion. Then he caught himself and laughed. "What's so funny?" his wife asked. "Nothing," Ray said, standing up. "I was just thinking we should go introduce ourselves. Bring them some cookies or something." His wife raised an eyebrow. "No spying this time?" "No spying," Ray promised. "I've learned my lesson. Not everyone with a duffel bag is a criminal." As they walked across the street to welcome their new neighbors, Ray pulled out his phone and deleted the FBI job offer email. Some people were born to be agents, but he discovered something important about himself. He was happier being an ordinary guy with an ordinary life, one who minded his own business. Well, mostly his own business. Old habits die hard, after all.